a lot of them are flying BVLOS. And what they're doing is they have safety spotters at the launch site and at the landing site everywhere they go. So they're stopping people on the sidewalks, they're stopping cars, they're making sure it's safe to deliver. Well, you can't just remove the safety spotters and be having drones dropping in small spaces where a child could knock the drone out of the sky with a football, So that's what I'm talking about. How does that business model really going to work?
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 321. How will we maintain accountability for package delivery when beyond visual line of sight operations begin? Today's guest has an answer. Stephen Flynn is founder and CEO of SkyTango, a global drone services company located in Dublin, Ireland. Stephen is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, director of photography, and editor, and a commercial drone pilot since 2013. In 2019, he led Ireland's first beyond visual line of sight drone delivery of insulin to an island community. He recently finished a 9-month stint with Wingcopter, working as a senior business developer. He has also led teams to achieve new milestones in the beyond visual line of sight arena. His experience with BVLOS drone delivery has led to looking at how best to manage and track packages to ensure an accurate, smooth, and safe delivery to the customer. According to Stephen, improving accountability in the workflow is key to protecting and growing the commerce of the drone delivery industry. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Stephen talks about SkyTango, the drone delivery business, and how maintaining accountability is paramount to the long-term profitability of BVLOS drone delivery. But before we hear from Stephen, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's find out how improving the accountability and tracking of package delivery will grow the commerce of BVLOS drone delivery with Stephen Flynn of SkyTango. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Stephen to introduce himself.
My name is Stephen Flynn, and I'm the CEO at SkyTango.
Steve, what is SkyTango?
Well, SkyTango is a software service system. It's a platform built around trying to encourage compliance and accountability in drone operations. And the whole vision behind it was working to create ways to use the carrot, not the stick, right? And we started in 2015, and we've been through quite the startup journey. In 2017 or 2018, we actually secured investment, but then declined the investment at the last round. And a big reason for that was we were really looking at the way the industry was unfolding, and it was moving so quickly in terms of how it was evolving and changing. And we decided that rather than trying to chase that under investment pressure, that we'd actually step back and let things mature a little bit to reach a point where accountability was actually really valued within the industry. I say that a little lightly in that accountability is valued, except even today, I know of operators that are going beyond their license limits because no one's around to watch. And I think that over time, it's really changed, and the industry is starting to mature quite a bit. I think one of the things we've always likened it to is the medical industry. These new industries, when they first start, they really need time to iterate and change and figure out how they work. And in a lot of ways, it makes sense that accountability can't really necessarily be in the forefront, because that limits the way things can evolve. If you imagine 200 years ago in the medical industry, they were doing things that people wouldn't be allowed to do today, right? But we learned from those iterations and the way they had to figure out how medicine worked. And I think in a lot of ways, the drone industry has been very similar in that in the early years, there was a lot of fast movement, rapid movement, technological development. And a lot of it was sort of accountability to the wayside in a lot of ways. And I think the industry's reached a point for us to come back in with our vision. And we think the industry is now ready to really start embracing the kind of software and services that we want to start providing, which is based on accountability.
What was the original idea in regard to creating standards or accountability?
So the original vision was that every time the drone went up, there were at least two parties that were interested in it being successful. It was the pilot or the drone operator. It was their customer, but it was also the landowner or the city or the community underneath that drone. And what our platform does is brings those three together in a really unique and seamless way so that when that material is then sold or monetized, there's a very distinct trail as to where it came from. So we were always very interested in trying to give operators that were operating with insurance, under compliance, and going through all of that overhead a way to make their content and their assets more valuable than somebody who was just launching a drone without any regard to licensure or insurance. So we've had a lot of interest over the last few years. We can talk about some of the work we've been doing in drone delivery, but a lot of interest from cities and landowners. And when I say landowners, I don't mean individual homes. I'm talking about kind of larger entities, national parks, like I said, city councils, that kind of thing.
Can you give us an example of how it might come into play?
If you were hired to take aerials and photographs in Central Park and you had to pay for permits and deal with the city and deal with the police and crowd control and insurance and all the rest, you should be able to sell that digital asset at a higher cost than somebody who just floats out a Maverick and ignores all of that. Now, the market never really had a lot of uptake on this vision because it was very hard to get people to embrace that accountability. I think what's interesting is over the last 3 years, we really sort of relaxed and let the industry mature, and I ended up spending a bunch of time doing drone delivery. So I performed the first autonomous parcel delivery in Ireland for the National Postal Service in 2018. And on the back of that, I was approached by the University of Galway to deliver insulin 22 kilometers out to an island off the coast of Ireland. And that project ended up being what we believe was the first BVLOS delivery of insulin with a return blood sample on the way back. So we partnered with Wingcopter and Vodafone and Novo Nordisk. So we've been doing a lot of work in this drone delivery space. And what's really interesting is all the compliance and accountability issues that we were building for in the media space, in surveys and photography in the early days are actually more important with regard to these beyond visual line of sight operations, with regard to how does a community trust where this drone is coming from. And I'm not talking about the airspace, I'm talking about the commerce of the actual operations of drone delivery. And so there's a lot of opportunity within the industry now to start defining how does that business really work. I think at the moment, there's tremendous amount of hype around beyond visual line of sight delivery. And a lot of that is being driven by what you have to sell to a VC to raise your money, right? You have to say, this is all happening now. And I know from firsthand experience over the last few years, there's a lot going on behind the scenes where a lot needs to be sorted out with regard to the business model and how that operation is actually going to be able to function. Completely separate from sort of UTM and airspace issues and airspace integration. I mean, that will be solved on a technological level, but there's a whole business level that needs to be figured out as well. You know, when a community is suddenly going to wake up and find drones flying over their neighborhoods delivering coffee, or, you know, it's going to be a very interesting 3 or 4 years as we try and sort this out. So that's what we're working on.
When you talk about the commerce of drone delivery, what do you mean?
It's not about the airspace. It's not about UTM. It's not about, you know, how the drone is going to get someplace, because that's complicated in and of itself. And there's a lot of really smart companies figuring that out. What I think is still really new and needs to be addressed is the first 10 feet and the last 10 feet of that delivery. If you're looking at the things that are on LinkedIn and YouTube, you're seeing a lot of companies promoting their advancements, but they're dropping packages right on the front sidewalk of someone's home. In order to do that, a lot of them are flying VLOS, and what they're doing is they have safety spotters at the launch site and at the landing site everywhere they go. So they're stopping people on the sidewalks, they're stopping cars, they're making sure it's safe to deliver. Well, you can't just remove the safety spotters and be having drones dropping in small spaces where a child could knock the drone out of the sky with a football, you know? So that's what I'm talking about. How does that business model really going to work? One of the really interesting companies that I think has a good beat on this is a company called Edu Group out of the UK. And their whole focus is on smart delivery doors in homes and businesses. So you can actually figure out, as soon as you look at that, you start to say, well, when the drone starts to come to its destination, you've got to make sure that it's the right drone, that it's delivering to the right place, that they're expecting it, that the payload was monitored and managed the way it was supposed to be managed. And then, their doors automatically open after a sophisticated handshake to confirm that this is done. And you can then drop the package in a safe and secure place, as opposed to in front of someone's home where it could be picked up. Now, I fully accept that if you're out in the rural area, you can drop a package, obviously, on a farm, or, it's not one solution fits everything. But that is a really interesting question. It's like, how are you really going to scale these operations? And I think the industry at the moment, over the next few years, has a great opportunity to engage in these questions to try and help us figure out how a community is going to embrace these services. Because clearly there's a benefit to them, but I'm not convinced that we've really figured out how that's going to completely work, right? In terms of the commerce and the acceptance of that service. And it has to be about accountability and the operations and all the pieces that come into that. So it's a really fascinating space at the moment.
Yeah, I can see the challenges. Without a system to track packages, we could easily see rogue drones delivering packages containing things they shouldn't.
Exactly. And I think our premise is that the community somehow has to have a seat at that table. They have to be included as a stakeholder in that operation, right? And at the moment, that's not in anyone's business model, but it's going to have to be. When you look at what a community has done in manned aviation, where in many places they've created noise abatement rules, where, for instance, in City Airport in London, all departures and arrivals are canceled, I think, after 8 o'clock at night. And if you take off a minute late, you have a huge fine levied onto the operator from the community. So there's this sort of gray space between airspace and the community beneath it. And I think this beyond visual line of sight operations is going to develop right in that gray space, right? And I think in the early days, operators would say, well, I'm legal to be there because the FAA or the IAA or the CAA has said I can be there. And that's legally true. But as soon as you move into deliveries or beyond visual line of sight operations, down low over homes, you're going to have more community interest. And it's been proven with our partners at Smart Dublin and a few other cities here in Ireland, they're very eager to engage as a stakeholder. And so that's what I mean about the commerce of these operations, not so much the technical aspects, because they're smarter people than me working on that. But I think that there's a key piece here about accountability and transparency of operation that if we can build it now and bake it into the system, then we're all going to be better off for it.
Can you describe the insulin delivery flight? How did it come about, and what did you learn from that demonstration?
Oh, great question. The delivery of insulin we did to the Aran Islands, which is a chain of islands 22 kilometers off the coast of Ireland, was in September of 2018. And that was a great learning experience. The first delivery we did was 5 or 6 kilometers, and I built a large drone and we chased it in a rib underneath the drone and let it fly autonomously, but there was a pilot underneath it at all times. So it was more a demonstration. It wasn't beyond visual line of sight by any stretch. So this next one was an entirely different level of learning, and it took us about 9 months to get this project from the first phone call to the actual flight. And it was difficult insofar as trying to figure out how do you execute this flight within manned airspace. The Irish Aviation Authority is very progressive and encouraging of this kind of work, and they worked very closely with us to actually put the drone up into controlled airspace because it was easier for them to deal with it that way. So it flew a bit higher than it normally would. We reached out to Wingcopter in their early days, and they sent a team over, and the flight was 22 kilometers in one direction. And, we had to coordinate with the clinics and then 22 kilometers back. And what it showed to me was obviously the potential of the service, but also how difficult it is. And I think that as soon as you start to fly beyond visual line of sight, the standard of hardware and software is going to have to be extremely high. When you look at the cost of a drone, generally the components, while they can be expensive, they're nowhere near as expensive as manned aircraft components, with regard to airworthiness, right? So how is the industry going to actually build these machines to a reliability level, but yet keep the price point low enough that you can actually make the business model work for drone delivery, right? It's going to be very difficult. At the moment, a lot of the payloads would need to be high value and low weight, like vaccines or medicines, When you start getting into delivering things with very low margins and you need to make a delivery for $3 or $4, that's going to be very, very difficult. The margins are going to be very thin. And so there's so much to be solved in these beyond visual line of sight operations with regard to hardware, software, airspace. It was a big lift, let's put it that way. And I think when we finished, I laid down on the runway and just laid there for 20 minutes because it was just such a lift to try and get the thing to make that crossing. Now, that was almost 2 years ago now. So I know things have moved on quite a bit.
What's happened since that demonstration? Have there been other tests or follow-ups?
Since we performed that flight in 2019, September 2019, within Ireland, there's been an awful lot of development. Wingcopter came back the next year during COVID, and we flew about 1,500 miles on a circuit doing some BVLOS operations out in the west. There's another Irish company called Mana Aero. They're making a lot of headway. They just, I think, landed a nice A round. You can look them up. They're leading in with regard to drone delivery in a couple of the villages out west. And I think they're going to be expanding possibly to the US and out to the UK. But all of this is being fueled by VC funding, which is terrific. But then at some point, as it starts to scale, how is that going to fit into the communities? How is that going to actually fit into the commerce of dealing with these packages and the acceptance of the public? And I think that we need to stay in front of that and not get behind.
So how can we do that?
Moving into the next couple of years, we're actually getting ready to launch a new initiative. As I said, we're getting ready to get back up into the market. And a big piece of this is an initiative to help the industry create standards around the commerce of beyond visual line of sight operations. And that would include bringing in some partners from aircraft manufacturers to flight controllers to UTM companies, trying to bring this all together in a way and work together to come up with standards. Because as soon as you start to try and deliver to multiple places, you've got to figure out a way to agree on how it's done between companies. I mean, otherwise, you might end up, the best example I can come up with is, it's not like only FedEx can come knock at your front door, right? Your home can take packages from any number of companies. But at the moment, it's not really set up that way, right? The drone industry wants to kind of create these small silos around their closed systems, and then they can kind of scale their businesses that way. But ultimately, there's going to have to be some sort of cooperative agreement between how we're going to get this stuff done. And I think the best way to get there is to work together as opposed to trying to create, siloed systems that don't actually connect together. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a lot of fun.
That's got to be a challenge. There are a lot of companies trying to master drone deliveries. There's value in being the first to do that. So how do you get companies to collaborate?
I think one of the interesting observations from my experience is I've seen the drone industry sort of iterate on itself twice, right? In the early days, when I first jumped in 2013, I think we probably spent $65,000 to try and create a drone service that took high quality images from the air. And then the Phantom came along, right? And it removed all the barriers to my competitors providing the same service for a whole lot less. And then it kind of happened again when the RTK drones came in my opinion. It probably opened up that industry to people doing high accurate surveys for construction and for whatever services, whereas previously you needed to be very skilled and trained to do survey work. And I think that that's going to happen in the future with drone delivery, or certainly BVLOS, right? In the initial days, managing a flight took a whole team of pilots. It was 4 or 5 people dealing with one aircraft to get this thing across. And now these companies are developing software for one pilot to fly 10 drones at a time. You load the mission profile, push a button, and it goes. And the only barrier to entry is managing with the regulator. So as soon as all that starts to come along, pretty soon you're going to have a big flush of companies stepping into the drone delivery space. And it's predictable. It's done it twice before. And I think that when it does that, because these flights will be beyond line of sight, there's got to be a way to encourage accountability on that in a way that doesn't exist yet. And so I think that's in our near future. I think that the big companies are going to get there first, but I also believe that it won't be long before small companies are nipping at their heels as well. So the technology is there, and if you've got the money, you can build what you need. It's about building that trust and accountability into the system as well, so that it doesn't become a blocker for your bottom line, down the road.
Would you be interested in hearing from others if they share the same interest?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear from them. It's the early days of this initiative. We're hoping to make some public announcements probably by the end of the summer with some of the founding partners. But if you're in this industry and you're building technology or supporting services and you share that vision of an open, accountable industry, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you.
So what's your next step?
Immediately next on my agenda is to secure the founding partners in this initiative. We've got a few that I can't talk about at the moment. And these are partners across various verticals, including city governments and some medical networks. And then we'll make that announcement and figure out the structure of how this initiative will work, and then get that launched in the fall.
After going at this for nearly 5 years, where does your motivation come from?
That's a really good question. Every time I write a proposal for something else, for a job application or for various project, I keep coming back to this idea that it's important that this industry be done right from the perspective of the business of the industry. I really believe that accountability is going to be key. I feel like there's so much benefit that comes from these operations and from drones and from the technology. And I'd love to see this industry really land in a way in 10 years where we say, we got this right. We got the privacy protections, we got the accountability, we got the safety, we got it all right. And the cities and everybody's at the table, all the stakeholders feel like they've got a voice in some way to be engaged. And I just feel like that's the way it needs to be. It's exciting to try and make that happen. And every time we think of closing the company, something else comes along and says, you know what? No, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. And it seems to be picking up again with regard to people's interest in what we were trying to do 5-6 years ago. And so I keep hacking at it. There's a fine line between being resilient and insane. So, sometimes I'm on one side of the line and sometimes I'm on the other. But hopefully it's got a future, and it's been a lot of fun.
Is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
I'm just a big believer that disruptive technology is terrific as long as it's done in a way that it ends up not being destructive to something else, insofar as creating too much of a negative.
And for my final question, Steve, what message would you like to leave regarding the drone industry?
It's an amazing place, right? It's a really rewarding industry to be in. There's an awful lot of people with so much passion and energy. And I think there's just a lot of great things in the future coming forward. And it seems like more and more people are talking about working together and coming together to figure out how to solve these problems together. I think it's an amazing place to be at the moment.
That's it for episode 321 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Stephen Flynn of SkyTango. I want to thank Stephen for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about SkyTango or want to connect with Stephen, check out the website at skytango.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.